Ladies and gentlemen, please get up for John and Brenda.
Thanks, everybody. I'm really glad to see everybody here. I never would have thought back when we made Doom that it would happen, like it would be popular for over 25 years. Crazy, but you know, thanks for playing the game back in the day, and I know some of you are still playing the game today. That's really cool. Might be one of the reasons why we're able to be up here and talk to you still.
I mean, as I was coming from the toilet just about 5 minutes ago, walking past the shop, what's on the windows about like Doom t-shirts, I mean, you're all over the place. You know, and I was telling my girlfriend before I came down, she is completely not a gamer, but when I told her John Romero, she goes, oh my god, and she was telling the guys, oh my god, and they were like, wow.
Wow. That's pretty great.
So I just want to thank you guys on behalf of me and everyone sitting here. It's an utter privilege to be able to speak to you guys. Can I say you've got an absolute awesome head of hair? Much like myself. I mean, coders are generally kind of geeks, but you are quite literally the Alice Cooper, John Bon Jovi and Dave Lee Roth of Rockstar of our humble hobby, so thank you very much for coming along. So before, just to kind of kick things off, John, can you tell us what was your very, very early experience of video games, and did you play the arcades on a regular basis?
Yeah, getting into video games, I was actually playing in pinball arcades before video games came out. So this is in the 70s. And I remember when across from the pinball, like there was a wall of pinball machines, probably about 30 pinball machines in a row at this place in Tucson, Arizona. This place is called Spanky's, and it was dark and it was cool, and you know, pinball and all the noise and stuff. And one day there was this machine that they put on the opposite wall, and it was called Doom Buggy, and it was an electromechanical machine. It wasn't video yet. So when you looked inside of the cabinet, which was pretty big, there was actually physical terrain there with like a Doom Buggy on it, and it was all black lit, so it's fluorescent paint, and it was just super surreal. And it was really cool to play that game. And I was like, And then right next to it, pretty soon, comes video games, you know, Space Invaders, and there was a game called Targ that appeared there. And as soon as I saw, you know, a video game, I was like, okay, this is really cool. This is cooler than the pinball machines. And I played games in the arcade for years after that.
I think there's kind of two types of video game fans. There's people like me who are completely non-technical and we just consume games, and then there's guys who like to tinker. Can you talk us through what inspired you to start tinkering?
Well, you know, the funny thing is, I love playing games, and I never thought that I could actually make them. But you know, this is like the weirdest story, but when I was 11, my friend came to my house in the summertime. He comes home on his bike and he says, I found a place where we can play games for free. I'm like, no way, oh my god. So I got on my bike and we rode together up to the local college. And we went to the computer lab there, and there was almost no one in there. There was a couple students, and you know, I would go into this room. There's about 20 terminals connected to a mainframe in another room. So this giant computer fills the room, and so he, you know, I'm just like, oh wow, neat. Okay, so let's play some games. And he was basically showing me these text games on the computer, and they had nothing to do with arcade games, and they had nothing to do with the graphics or sound. But they were really different, and I didn't have to like hurry up, and I didn't have to put money in. I could think before each turn, and that was really another, wow, this is amazing. So when I got to play Adventure, the original Colossal Cave Adventure on there, then it was like, oh my god, this is amazing. So, and I was then at some point thinking, what are these students doing? And he said, well, they're programming. They're programming the stuff that you've been playing. I'm like, you program games on these things? So he said, yeah, and I started asking the students what they were typing in, and it was BASIC. They were programming in HP BASIC. So I started to write down all the words in use them on another terminal to just learn how to program in BASIC. And I kept asking them and asking them. Eventually, they give me a book, so I don't ask anymore. And then I could just learn. And then I could just learn as fast as possible how to program in BASIC and start making like really basic adventure games and stuff on the mainframe. And it took me probably 3 years of going to the college in the summer where I wouldn't get kicked out, and going to local computer stores in town that had Ataris and Apple IIs, etc. Until 3 years later, my parents finally got me a computer at home, so then I didn't need to go outside anymore.
According to a certain factual website, your first commercial gig was with Origin Systems. What systems and games did you work on?
So Origin Systems was the company that made the Ultimate series of games, if you remember those. I got my first industry job in '87 at Origin, and I loved their games for years. And when I thought about which company I would want to work at, Sierra was one of them, Origin was one, and there was another company called Sirius Software that on the Apple II had made a lot of really fast arcade games. So in 1987, I went to a trade show called Apple Fest, and when I went in, and basically right in front of me was a booth for a company called Uptime that sold disc subscriptions. So you get a disc in the mail, and every month you would get just a collection of rando stuff. And I used to sell them games all the time. So when I went into this big Apple Fest, there's a bunch of people playing my game in their booth, which was really a pretty good omen. The owner of the company offered me a job, and I'm like, okay, interesting. And I went to their competition, who then, they also were interested. And then I'm walking around, and I saw Origin's booth, and I was like, oh my God, I have to get I went to this show to get a job. I didn't go there just to look around. I brought all my discs with me. So I went into the Origin booth, and I saw that they had Ultima 5 running on, it was still in development, it was running on some Apple II computers in there. And they had one computer that had Ultima 1 on it that had been rewritten in assembly, because the original was in BASIC. So I just popped the disc out, and I put my disc in, and I rebooted their computer. And the marketing person came over, I can't believe I did this, but the marketing person came over and was like, what are you doing? And I said, check it out. And she saw my game, and she's like, wow, okay, those graphics are really good. And I said, yeah, that's my game. I make games. I made tons of them. So she wanted my information, and I said, can I have your business card, which was actually the critical thing. And I kept on calling them until I finally got a job. I had to take a test over the phone and everything, but still, I pestered them into a job.
So did you do graphics, and can you code yourself, John?
Yeah, back then, as a programmer, you have to do your own audio and your own graphics and, code out, And I was working on porting 2400 AD from the Apple II to the Commodore 64.
So did you walk into an arcade and go, oh, quite like that here, Kung Fu, I think I'll just code that myself?
Well, I mean, I guess at that time, it wasn't a problem taking somebody else's game and just porting it. I kind of understood assembly language really, really well. It was like I spoke that better than English, probably. But yeah, it was a really fun job.
So after a number of years, apparently you went on to co-found a games company called Inside Out Software. Is that correct? And what prompted you to sort of go it alone? So go it alone, so to speak, rather than working under a kind of corporation?
Yeah, so what happened was is this working? Okay. I was at Origin, and my boss, he wanted to leave and start a game company. And he asked me if I would co-found the company with him. And I'd only been at Origin for, I think, 7 months, 8 months, something like that. And I'm like, hell yeah, that'd be awesome. Even though I loved Origin and it was my dream job, for some reason this was going to be really exciting. So I said yeah, and I basically left Origin, started a company called Inside Out Software with my previous boss, now my co-founder. And in our first thing, this was like us doing porting contracts until we could do original games. So we started porting, we did Might Magic 2, and he ported it to the PC from the Apple II, and I ported it to the Commodore 64 from the Apple II. So if you've played Might Magic 2 on the Commodore 64, that's my port. And so I basically did that game, and then I worked on another game over here. It was called Nebulous. It was called Tower Toppler in the United States. But I was porting that game from the Commodore 64 back to the Apple II, and then the 8-bit industry crashed while I was doing that in 1989. And as soon as it crashed, I'm like, I need to learn how to program the PC. So I was at my startup only for maybe 9 months. And then I was like, I need to leave and go basically learn the PC as fast as I can.
So you later co-founded a company called Ideas from the Deep, I didn't know, didn't you? Before moving to Louisiana in 1989. And you joined Softape Disc as a programmer working on a PC monthly disc magazine. After a short time, you moved into a game development arm called Gamer's Edge. When you went on to recruit a certain Mr. John Carmack, can you tell us how this came to be?
Yeah, I was working at so when I left that startup, I started another company called Ideas from the Deep, and then I only made a few games there before starting working at Softdisk, which was in Louisiana, which is not a video game capital anywhere. And it was basically like the Uptime stuff, where you basically buy, you have a subscription, and every month you get a disc full of stuff. That's what Softdisk was. I got tired of doing that after, I think it was a year, a little over a year, and I was done doing this. I basically have to ship something every month. Usually it's a utility, sometimes it's a game if I'm lucky, but it was because it's only a month. Making a game in 1 month and shipping it is not very fulfilling because you can't make a really great game. So what I was doing was porting my Apple II games over to the PC. So I already knew the PC really well by that time, and I told the president of the company, I'm gonna go work at LucasArts or something because I need to actually spend time making games. And so he said, please don't leave. We'll start a game disc. And I said, okay, how about, instead of shipping something every month, how about if I ship a game every 2 months and I have a team of people, like maybe 3 other people, maybe there's 4 of us. And he said, okay, let's do that. And so I needed to hire a programmer and an artist. The 4th person was going to be like the manager person to deal with the connection of our product to the rest of the organization. So I needed a programmer and an artist. I went into the next room, and which is like the art room where the artists do work for the whole, like every disc that they have there. And he promised me I would get my own artist. So I'm like, this is great. I said I have to have my own artist. I can't have a room full of people doing stuff. I need them in the room with me. So I saw a guy with long hair out of everybody, the only one. And I was like, hey, so what's your name? You know, he's like, my name's Adrian. And I was like, you like metal? He's like, yeah, I listen to metal all the time. I'm like, good, we're gonna get along with each other. Hey, what do you think about making art for video games? And he's like, well, that sounds cool, as long as my boss says I can do it. So I just went to his boss, who was running the art staff, and just said, hey, you know, would you mind if I took Adrian and have him in the next room, just making game art? And so he's just like, okay, yeah, then next month, go ahead and take him. And Adrian had only been working that month on a computer. So he'd never actually done game art or any art, really. He was learning how to, like, use VGA and EGA, you know, 16 color mode and stuff. So he came into the room, and I also needed a programmer. And I made so many games back then. I would go home from my job and make games. So I would make games at work, and then go home and I make even more games, and I sell those games. And one of the games that I had done at night, I sold back to the company Softdisk, because they have they have Apple II discs still, and I was doing PC stuff. So I would sell my games to them, the Apple II games, and the latest disc that I was on had a game from a guy named John Carmack, and it was a game called Tennis. I had a game called Substalker, and his was Tennis. And it was a really, really good tennis game, which is, normally you would not get excited about tennis on a computer, but he did a really good job programming it. So I could tell that he was a great programmer just from watching his code run, watching the game run. So I asked the Apple II guys who were in touch with him, hey, can I get in touch with this guy? I'd really like to hire him. And they said, forget it. We've tried to hire him twice. He's not interested. And I said, I want to hire him just to make games all day. I think he'd be interested. Can just get in touch with him. So they did, and he said, okay, I'll come down for an interview. So that kind of, they were just like, what? Okay, this is great. He came down, and I brought my friend Lane, who was inside of our group when we came to Softisk. Lane came with us. He's an expert level assembly language programmer. And so when John came down to meet with us, it was like he found his brotherhood. Like he'd never talked to anybody that knew a lot about programming on a computer. So he immediately wanted to join the company. So I hired him into Gamer's Edge, and that's when we started making stuff.
Obviously, this coming together of great minds eventually led to the formation of, is it ID Software or is it
id Software? Not ID.
Right, id Software, which led to obviously landmark games and genre-defining titles like Doom, Doom 2, Doom 3, Doom 4, Doom 5, Heretic, Hexen, Quake, etc., etc. Now, prior to the game changer that Doom was, you published a game called 3D Wolfenstein. I can always remember my mate showed me on a PC. It was PCs were crap, and then he showed me this game. I'm like, wow.
Oh yeah.
I was a C64 fanboy, and one of my favourite games was Castle Wolfenstein and Beyond Castle Wolfenstein by a certain sadly late guy called Silas Warner.
Yep.
Am I right in thinking that was that the inspiration behind?
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, Castle Wolfenstein was a classic game on the Apple II.
I mean, it had speech and everything.
Yeah. Yeah, he was, Silas was really early. He's a 70s programmer, and he started Muse Software in Baltimore, Maryland. And he programmed all kinds of utilities, like utilities to record your voice and play it back. And he made lots of games himself. But he, like in 1981, he made Castle Wolfenstein and published it. He made other games as well, but this was just like, what a magical game that he made. And it was actually the first stealth game ever made as well, because you have to be stealthy in that game and hold people up and take their uniforms and pretend that you're that you're an officer. So anyway, he was such a amazing programmer, super creative person. He was also 6'7", so he was really tall. But he just changed the world with that game, and so we grew up with it.
Did you get to meet him at all?
Yeah, we got to meet him. The weirdest thing was, like, we made Wolfenstein in 1992, and because we were Apple II people, even though the Apple II was kind of dead and buried, and we're programming the PC, we would still go every year to an Apple II conference in Kansas City that's called Kansas Fest. For some reason, it's not called Apple II Fest anymore. And we would go every year, and every year they have people from, that might be from Apple, they might be people who had made games in the 80s. And when we, in 1992, when we finished Wolfenstein, we bought the first color laptop that existed. It was a Toshiba laptop. We brought it with us down there with Wolfenstein on it, so we could show our Apple II friends that we made Wolfenstein again, but in 3D on a PC. And then we find out that Silas Warner is the special guest that year, and he's going to be giving a talk about Muse Software and the history of Muse and Wolfenstein and Supertext and everything that he had written. And so we were in there listening to him talk, and the audio of him talking is on the internet. So they recorded it in 1992. Just the audio, and so we got to talk to him after he got done giving his lecture. We got to talk to him. We had him sign our Wolfenstein manual. We showed him the game, obviously. He thought it was really cool. And then later that night, he hung out with us in the hallway, just talking for hours with other programmers.
So that was like your John Romero moment, getting to meet this guy.
It was incredible. It was incredible to be able to talk to Silas Warner and just spend hours with him talking about assembly language.
Awesome. But back in the day, I was a staunch Commodore Amiga fan, and the 386s and 486s were gradually kind of coming into houses, but they were still pants as far as I was concerned. But that all changed when I went up to one of my mates' houses one day. He'd sold his Amiga, he'd got this PC, and he says, "You need to come up and see this game." And I can still remember going up the stairs, and I could just hear this noise, what I described as like the gates of hell, with roars, screams, booming growls. When I went into the room, I saw this behemoth 20-inch CRT, and my jaw just hit the floor, and it was Doom. And needless to say, the next day the Amiga was up for sale, and I was going to get a PC. It was mind-blowing, absolutely mind-blowing. I mean, Doom, it literally defined the first-person shooter, which has now become the mainstay of any systems. And obviously online multiplayer. Did you have any idea of the impact it was going to have at the time? Did you know this is going to blow people's minds?
We actually did. Sorry for the Amiga death, everybody. There are some Amiga history books out there that do blame Doom for the death of the Amiga, which is a whole, yeah, there's an interesting story of R.J. McCall who killed one of my games, so I kind of killed his system. Yeah, it's funny, we knew Doom was going to be a great game because we planned for it to be a great game. We'd already made Wolfenstein and Spirit of Destiny, and everybody loved those games. They were super fast, super violent. It's a new kind of game that people hadn't played before. But we knew that with Doom that we were making something that no one had even seen before, with the kind of architecture that we could make with lighting and the sound effects and just the spookiness of the game. So you probably don't remember this, but in January of '93 we put out a press release saying that Doom was going to be the best game ever made. And we just started working on it. We had a bullet point list that said what was going to be in it, and we knew that we could make that happen. Part of it, like one of the most, I guess, important things on that list was that we called it an open game, which means that people can mod it. We're going to make the game easy for people to modify so you can make it your own and do whatever you want with it. Make new levels, you can make new graphics, sound, you can make it look like something that's not even Doom. And people immediately did that when the game came out. But, deathmatch for the first time, you can do high-speed co-op or deathmatch with each other. Like, people had never done that before. If they had done that, it was back in the late 70s or early 80s with modems that were turn-by-turn, but nothing at that speed. Nothing that was high-speed, especially nothing that was a first-person game. So, yeah, we knew it was going to be really cool. We put everything into it. We basically said we have to make the best game that we can think of ever playing when we're making it. We didn't know it was going to last this long, because usually when we make the next game is supposed to ruin the previous game. So we knew Doom was not long for this world in our minds with Quake, but yeah, it lived.
So you're putting this game as being the best game ever, even though you hadn't even written it. I take it you know Peter Molyneux.
It's crazy.
Yeah. Have you any idea how many copies of Doom have been sold across the world?
I have no idea. Millions. Not sure. More have been downloaded, probably. Yeah. Which is legal if it's the shareware version.
I can quite honestly say I've never played a game since Doom which utterly terrified the audience. I mean, the demonic, utterly terrifying enemies, but these pulled together collectively as a team or one person. I mean, whose idea was it to come up with this?
So Tom Hall was the original designer on Quake, Doom, sorry. So he wrote the Doom Bible in November of '92 before we made the game. And he had a lot of, character ideas in there and level ideas, and there was a lot of stuff that he put in that Bible that eventually we didn't keep, but we did keep a lot of the high level ideas. Like there's going to be several levels that go through this base on Phobos. We're going to be battling these kinds of creatures, and so some of a lot of those ideas were there at the very beginning. What the characters looked like came out later, as we were developing, because he didn't draw all those pictures. But our team was really small. We only had 5 people making Doom. That's just me and John programming it, me and Tom designing, and Adrian doing the art on it, and Kevin Cloud doing the art. So 2 artists, 2 programmers, 2 designers, but I'm doing code and design. And so, you know, it was us five until Tom left in August, because that was not a game that was a Tom Hall game. Tom is Commander Keen. He's like Mario. He makes happy, fun games. And Wolfenstein was like very violent. And then Doom was just like even more, you know, dark and violent. And so it wasn't his cup of tea. So he decided to leave. And we brought in Sandy Peterson, who was a really great game designer. He made Call of Cthulhu, if anyone's remembered that. And then we brought in Dave Taylor, who was just out of college. He's a really fast, you know, programmer. And so he was, you know. Then we went up to 6 people, and then we shipped the game probably about 5 months after they both joined. But yeah, it was ideas originally with Tom, and then a lot of ideas from me and some from Sandy, and also we worked with the artists to like come up with what would be a cool thing that we could do now. Like the way that we were making the characters in Doom, we started out making them in clay. So we made clay characters, and we used a video camera to shoot frames and rotate them on a table and then animate them. And so we did this, it's called rotoscoping. So we did that. The problem with clay is that it tears when you animate it. Luckily, we only made a couple models of, you know, in clay, and then we had a Hollywood monster maker create the actual characters, you know. And so the first one he delivered to us was the Spider Mastermind, which is the episode 3 boss. Any other characters he made were for Doom 2. So the other characters in Doom 1, the artists were creating them on the computer in Deluxe Paint. You know, just hand by hand. So we didn't have too many scanned characters in Doom 1, but we had a bunch of them in Doom 2 scanned in.
I think what's absolutely phenomenal, and I suppose you could say that about any kind of game, but if I remember rightly, when I first installed Doom on my PC, it was like 14 meg. I mean, 14 meg, you can't even download a costume for a character nowadays. It's just ridiculous. Doom, I believe, that was one of the first games to sort of embrace the shareware ethos, wasn't it?
Well, it was. All of our games had been shareware games. Doom came out in the end of '93. Our first shareware game came out at the end of '90, and so we made Commander Keen, the first trilogy. The first episode was out in December 14th of 1990. Then we made another set of Commander Keen games, and December 15th of '91 was Keen 4. Then we do Wolfenstein, and we put that out in shareware as well in May 5th of '92. And then Doom was our next shareware game. And what we did was we kind of did a shareware game and then followed it up with a retail game. So we put a game out there, and then we put one in retail on shelves. With Doom, the thing that was really different was we realized, like, hey, not everybody has a modem that they could download a shareware game with. We need to get this in stores. And we put on the title screen of Doom, suggested retail price $9. And our intent was we could basically to get people to put Doom in the store and not charge more than $9 for just that shareware version. Because if it was too much, then they might not register it, because now how much does this game cost? $60 or something? So we contacted all the companies that were in the shops putting stuff on the shelf, and said, you can take this game, you can put it in a disc or a CD, put it on the shelf, and you don't pay us anything, and you could just make money off of it. Just get it in the store. And so many companies did that. So you could actually go into a computer store and see 10 copies of Doom on the shelf, all with different covers from different manufacturers with the same game in it. So that was really unique. That was something that we did to just get the game out there. So people were used to going to stores, buying discs, and and going home, and it was like, wow, $9, all right.
I think it's fair to say you succeeded in what you were trying to achieve. I mean, Doom's obviously evolved into various incarnations over the years. There's versions on the Xbox Series X, etc. But in my personal opinion, I don't think anything's come close to the terrifying spectacle of the original first one. It's just phenomenal.
Yeah, the PC.
Well, I would include Doom 2 in that as well. Apart from the genre, it's pioneered Doom. Doom also laid the foundation to the weapons. The weapons that you see in every game now. your handgun, you've got your shotgun, chainsaw, BFG, what does that stand for? Do you know what that stands for? No idea.
Bio.
Oh, so it's not true then.
Yeah.
What was the inspiration behind these weapons? Because you didn't have anything that had gone before, because you were writing, you were laying the
Yeah, it's funny.
path. Yeah.
We did with Wolfenstein. We did have a chain gun, which we did put in we put in Doom. We had like a machine gun, which we actually were planning on putting in Doom, and we took it out because we thought that shotgun would be cooler. And a pistol, and Wolfenstein had a knife, but we had a fist. Fist for punching, and then a chainsaw. You could alternate between those two if you had the chainsaw. But all those weapons were just like, we need to make weapons that are really cool, they have to sound cool, and the challenge with Doom, with the weapon, because we actually spend more time on Doom, the challenge was every new weapon that we put in the game needs to not remove any previous weapon. It needs to be additive. And with Wolfenstein, if you had a gun, you would never use a knife. If you had a machine gun, why would you use a pistol? And if you had the chain gun, why would you use anything below that? Unless you were almost out of ammo, and you had to be very careful. So with Doom, every weapon, there were usually 2 weapons that shared the same ammo, and each of those weapons was for a specific purpose, and neither of them removed the purpose of any other weapon. So like a plasma gun using a plasma gun does not get rid of the chain gun. You could run out of plasma cells and you need to use the chain gun, right? Chain gunners are really good for long distance shots. The regular shotgun is better at long distance than the double barrel. The BFG is for clearing out a room. The rocket launcher is great for collateral damage. So they all have different uses, and they're all very useful. If you have all of them, you want to use all of them. Versus in Wolfenstein, you just want to use the chain gun. So yeah, it was a challenge to make a game where all the weapons would stay with you. You always use them.
Obviously, Hexen and Heretic followed Doom, and they were more sort of like magic kind of based. How well received were these compared to the Doom games?
Yeah, Heretic and Hexen were really, really well received. They, there are some people like Heretic better than Doom because they just love medieval stuff. They love the music, they love the characters. They're just like people that love D&D, and this is like, back then, this was like a really great D&D game, action D&D. And then Hexen was a more complex, very tough version of Heretic. It introduced the idea of, in a shooter, of having a hub level system where you kind of go in and out of a hub, and every time you come back, the hub changes and opens up eventually to the next hub. And it also had character classes, so you could play through the game as a cleric or a mage or a fighter. So I was just experimenting with design in the FPS, but doing it in the medieval realm with Raven software, and it went really well. Activision bought Raven because of those games, so they bought the company, and Heretic was the first, and Hexen was the second, and I was making the third in the trilogy. It was called Hecatome, but I left it before we'd even gotten 4 months in. But when Activision bought Raven, they just made each one of those games their own brands. So there was a Heretic 2, and there was a Hexen 2. But yeah, those were really good games.
I think it's fair to say that 99% of your games were massive successes. Can we just talk about Daikatana?
Daikatana. Yes.
What happened there?
Daikatana. Who wants to know about Daikatana? Yeah. All right. This is good. So, my memoir is coming out in July of next year. The Ion Storm section's at least 3 chapters, I think, right? Yeah. Tells the whole story of what happened with Daikatana. It basically comes down to a lot of shenanigans were happening at the company with co-founders and other people I brought in that made it really hard to concentrate on being able to make the game. And also, I brought in a lot of people who this was their first job in the industry, even though they knew how to make levels They knew how to program. It was like this was a new kind of job for them, so they kind of had to learn how to make a game. And it took a long time to just teach people how to make a game. So on my team, the Daikatana team, I was the only person that had ever made games. And Daikatana was like game number 90 something for me. For them it was 1. So it was a lot of time spent teaching people and also just dealing with all the fires in the company. But you know, we did get the game out. It took 3 years to do it. I was on my 5th lead programmer. 4 of them had left before then. You know, it was a lot of work getting that game done. But IDOS was our publisher, and they really stood behind us with all of the craziness going on. They trusted that something was going to come out. Luckily, Tom Hall, who was my co-founder at Ironstorm, he was making a really great game called Anachronox, and so that game was good. It didn't critically do well because IDOS didn't really like advertise it much because they thought that the Dallas studio just wasn't going to do really good work after Dominion and Daikatana came out. But luckily, I brought in Warren Spector years earlier, and he made Deus Ex, which saved everything. And after I left Ironstorm, you know, he's still the company was around for another 4 years making Deus Ex sequels. So yeah, it was a really tough game to make. But the story is coming out not too long from now.
Thanks for telling us. Obviously after Doom came out, it wasn't long like any of these, when somebody brings along a new game mechanic, it's not long before the competition latches onto that, and there was various games, obviously Doom Become was one of them. Was there any like games from the competition that particularly impressed you and you think that's a good game?
Most of them, yeah, a lot of those games. Like because we had the engine, like we had the Doom engine, we could get games out faster using that technology, but I wanted to play more games than that. So we had come out with the Doom engine, with Doom, so we had this Doom engine. That's when I got Heretic started. So during 1994, we get Doom 2 out, and we get Heretic out. In the meantime, LucasArts is making Dark Forces, which was unbelievable. And in November of '94, I was at CES, I think in Chicago, we just had a booth there from GT Interactive, and I was sitting there just answering questions about Doom 2. You know, it was out, and it was gonna, you know, people just wanted to know where they could buy it and all that. And some people from LucasArts came over, and they wanted to show me this really cool game that they had. So I took off, and I went over to their booth, and they showed me a prototype version of Dark Forces running, and it looked amazing. And I was just like, I can't wait to play this game. It looks so good, and I love Star Wars, and you know, and it came out in March. It wasn't even that long, you know, probably like 5 months later it came out, and did really, really well. And I love Dark Forces. Duke Nukem 3D was amazing. You know, it came out, you know, months before Quake, but it was probably one of the best games of that era, of that 2.5D era, you know. Outlaws was awesome. Blood was awesome. Outlaws was, I don't know, if anyone heard of Outlaws? Really, really great game. Cartoon style, you know, graphics and cinematics and all that stuff. Really good story. Strife was another one. Anyone heard of Strife?
Yes.
All right, cool. First RPG FPS game. That was being developed on the same floor as us as well. We brought a team down from Illinois to develop Strife using our Doom engine. But yeah, those were probably some of like my favorites at that time. Blood was really, really fun. Yeah.
Obviously Quake came along, and when it dropped, I mean, it must have been responsible for increasing sales of like voodoo effects cards tenfold. Whilst Quake was a first-person shooter, it obviously did it kind of, excuse my technical ignorance, it utilised kind of like 3D polygons as opposed to like the flat kind of 3D sprites of Doom. How much more technically difficult was it to program a game like Quake as opposed to Doom?
Yeah, Quake was way more difficult than Doom. When we were making Doom, John Carmack got the engine running. Within the first month, we were starting to make levels. In fact, if you go online, you can find a video or one of the first versions of Doom that you could run from, I think, February 4th. And we'd started on that January 1st. So February 4th was the first version of Doom, which just shows some prototype stuff going on in there. So it's really early, but we could like make levels and stuff. Quake, and that was just John by himself doing that. With Quake, that engine was so difficult to make that we had 4 programmers on that engine, and mostly John Carmack and Michael Abrash, who was a legendary assembly language programmer back then. Both of them spent a whole year making that engine with a network programmer named John Cash. John Cash, after he left id, became lead programmer on World of Warcraft. And then Dave Taylor, who was there as well. So those 4 were basically just coding that engine for a whole year. And it was very difficult. It was like being redone, probably 8 times the renderer, because John would come up with a better way of architecting the data and architecting the code and coming up with some ways of caching graphics and light maps and all that. So Michael Abrash would have to rewrite all the rendering code in assembly language using floating point and in Intel instructions. So yeah, it was very difficult to make that engine. It took a year before we could even make a game with it. And then we just basically slammed Quake out in 7 months.
I mean, I can still remember doing Quake for the first time and running it, pretty low res, and then once you wanted to get more memory, you wanted to get a graphics card, and you got the 3D graphics card, and it suddenly looked awesome, and then you could ramp the resolution up, just phenomenal. I mean, id Software games, they're noted for their heavy metal soundtracks, which is good in my book. How did the 9-inch Nails come about, and have you got Trent Reznor in your mobile phone contacts?
Actually, Downward Spiral was a really big album when we were making Quake. It wasn't long into it when, I think it was American had come up with the idea, and he talked to John and said, it'd be really cool to get 9-inch Nails to do the soundtrack. So they came over and said, hey, what do you think about 9-inch Nails doing the soundtrack? And I'm like, well, no lyrics. I don't hear lyrics while we're playing, but I like the music is great. So let's see what we can do. And we told our biz guy, Jay. Jay contacted our Hollywood agency that we were talking to that was called ICM. ICM represented 9-inch Nails. So they're like, yeah, no problem. They got us hooked up, found out that 9-inch Nails had a 4-player deathmatch LAN on their tour bus. And they played it all the time. Get off stage, go play Doom, head to the next town. So they were excited, and so Trent would come over and hang out with us, and we talk about the music and what it would sound like, his ideas. And after telling him some of the ideas that we had, he gave us a bunch of files, a bunch of music in MP3 format that a friend of his had made that might be similar to what he's going to do. And so while we're making Quake, we would have his friends' music playing. Their MP3s, they sound really good, they're ambient, but his music was better when he when he got done and delivered those tracks to us. They were really, really cool. But it was like we could make the maps, moody, and they would still work when he got his stuff to us. But yeah, it was fun. He came down multiple times. Somehow, magically, before he comes, there's 100 women outside. Somehow they find out that he's coming to our office, and there's no reason for any women to be outside the office. But the limo pulls up, and he comes out, and it's, pictures and everything. But then he comes in, and we hang out, and sometimes we go out and just have beers or hang out at, bars and just talk about music and games. But American at the office, he was the one who was the one to be in touch with Trent. So he would go to New Orleans, where Trent lived right next to Am Rice, like they houses next to each other, and that was where his studio was at. So he would, American would go over there and just watch Chris Brenna and Trent and kind of coach him into like the sound effects for Ranger, your character in Quake, the sound effects that he needs to make when he's getting shot and opening doors and stuff. So those are all Trent Reznor's sound effects for the character. And in the tracks were being made. So American would call them, and he would go there and visit on site and basically handle getting the music done. So I don't have his number in my in my phone because I didn't actually deal with the music side.
I'll give you it later. What was your favourite id Software game to play, and what would you say was the most technically accomplished?
Well, Doom was probably my favorite, I'd say. Doom 2 is really cool. The double barrel shotgun changes everything. I think the level design is more improved, just we got better level design with Doom 2. Quake is technically more impressive because that's a ton of 3D work in software renderer mode even. That was very difficult to get that working. And it's multiplayer over the internet. But Doom did a lot of stuff first, that Quake didn't do with multiplayer over LAN or over modem, modding. It did a lot of really cool stuff. Quake, first time people could use mouse for mouse looking in a 3D world, because that became standard after Quake. Internet multiplayer in full 3D for with texture perspective correct texture mapping, which means that the textures don't jiggle around as you're looking around, because there's too many games back then that will shimmer when you're like going closer to the wall and looking at it in weird directions, and we had to have it completely solid. So that's why it took extra time.
So back in the day, was it all hot tubs, hookers and recreational substances back then? Or can't you possibly say because Mrs. R's sitting on your left?
What drugs did we do? So, probably won't believe this, but I don't drink. John Carmack does not drink. Socially, yeah, I would drink every once in a while socially, but normally don't ever drink. No one did drugs ever. We made games, that's what we did, and we did it all the time. There was no time for doing anything else that would we can't actually play games if we're high or whatever. We can't make games or we'll screw up all the code. So the only way to actually get things done was to just not do that.
We've all seen some of Atari games. Yeah.
Hard to believe, but true.
So I believe you later resigned from id Software over, was it kind of artistical differences regarding the future of the company? Is that an amicable thing, or was it quite a sort of unpleasant time?
Well, yeah, because in November of '95, the engine was done, and I was ready to experiment with game design to figure out what Quake was going to be. There was already an idea of what the game was going to be for a year. We all knew what the game was going to be. It was talked about online, etc. It was a medieval game, and you were going to have this big, huge hammer. And I looked at the Quake engine as a 3D engine. I didn't look at it as a specifically FPS-only engine. But what can we do in 3D? The way that Shigeru Miyamoto experimented with 3D, made Super Mario 64. What can we do in 3D that will be cool and original? And we talked about these designs for a whole year, and when it came down to it, it took a whole year to make that engine. And then the team just was too tired to even try and experiment again. We just spent a year of R&D making the technology. How long is it going to take to figure out this new game? We don't even want to know. So let's just make it a shooter. And the fact that people on the team were not going to spend time exploring game design and doing something innovative on the design side, for me, that's what I want to do. And I also saw that 3D cards were taking away the advantage that we had as a company, because we were all about making really, new 3D revolutionary graphics, and the cards are going to be doing that. And the only way to really compete is with game design, doing something that So anyway, in January, I basically decided that I was going to leave after Quake was finished, and I talked to Tom Hall, and he was working on Prey over at 3D Realms, and he said, okay, we'll start a company when Quake is done. So finally, Quake is done, and I call up a publisher, and they're excited about me leaving and talking to me about doing another game. The next day, it asks me for my resignation. The company that I talked to was a publisher of Quake, but they weren't going to be a publisher of anything after Quake, so we had already shifted our business to Activision. So I'm like, they probably called us. Probably talked to the Jay Wilbur, our biz guy. So I was leaving anyway, so I signed it, and I was like, just started Iron Storm right then. Immediately got called by Activision, Epic. Basically was talking to everybody for probably about half a year setting up the new company. But the creative differences happened in November when the company was not going to dedicate any time really to game design for Quake. So we did know how to make a shooter, and Quake was a really fun game when it came out because we were in crunch mode for 7 months with Quake. That was 7 days a week, at least 10 hours a day, nonstop, get that game done. And then I left after I went on a short vacation, came back, then I made the retail discs to put in the stores, and then then I resigned after they told me I was resigning. and then I was basically starting Iron Storm after that. Amicable, yes, very amicable. I still talk to John Carmack.
I'm just answering question 24. So it's fair to say that Doom spawned the entire first-person shooter, a genre which probably makes up, I would say, probably about 90% of modern video games these days. Do you think there's still mileage in the genre? And what's your thoughts on VR? Have you dabbled in that at all? Any thoughts on playing out games in VR?
Yeah, I've played a bunch of games in VR. VR is really cool. I kind of look at VR as a specialized console. It's a platform that is good at immersing a player in an experience, and there are things that it can do really well that you can't do on other consoles, but there's other things that other consoles can do that you can't do in VR. And so a lot of the confusion that people have had over VR is trying to make things that run on consoles run on VR and make it feel better, but sometimes it just makes people feel sick. So when you have to design something for VR that's great for that platform, and there's some really great stuff. If you move slow enough, you're good. So yeah, I do like VR. Like one of the cool new games that we played was called Demio, which is a Dungeons and Dragons game that you basically in VR sitting around a D&D table, and you can just stretch it, zoom yourself in, move your piece, do whatever you're gonna do, heal, attack, whatever. And you're playing with a party of people that could be anywhere in the world. You don't even need to know where they're at. And the connecting is seamless, and it's like Blizzard made this game, but they didn't. It's an excellent game by Resolution Games in Sweden. And Tom Hall works at that company.
So can you just tell us what you're up to these days, John? I believe you're living in Ireland now?
Yeah, so we moved to Ireland, Brenda and I, and our family. We moved all of us over. We actually have 6 kids, but we moved 4 of them over because the other 2 were in their 30s. They didn't need to come with us. So we came to Ireland because Brenda was awarded a Fulbright grant to basically study Ireland's game ecosystem. You want to just talk?
Are you tired of talking?
See, I feel guilty for all the people who are standing back there. I just followed them up here, and now look, everybody's standing, and I have a seat. I got a Fulbright Award to study Ireland's game industry, so we just really liked it. Felt a little. It was Silicon Valley is pretty dog eat dog. And if you want to have a small game company, it's not who you are. We just want to make games, and we want to make enough to make the next game. We're not interested in having a massive company and selling out and whatever. So we found a really good place, and we love living just in Europe in general. So we moved all the kids over, and we're not going back.
Fantastic. I've just got one very last question before we open the floor. ZX Spectrum or Commodore 64?
Commodore 64. Spectrum is great. Spectrum is great. But the Commodore, I also like the BBC Micro. As a programmer, being able to program an assembly while you're in BASIC is one of the coolest things ever.
Right guys, I've got a few minutes just to get a few questions. Ian's going to come around with the microphone. If you can put your hand up please. I know there's going to be 100.
Question for John. Aside from Daikatana, is there a game where you feel like we could have done a much better job? That's it.
Well, yeah, I think Quake, we could have done a much better job if we had spent some time thinking about what we could do in 3D. It did turn out really well, but I think that it could have been better. Wolfenstein, with some more time, could have been a better game, but it was really great for when it came out. I don't know, Wolfenstein, when we put the shareware version out, that was only 4 months worth of work for 4 people. So we started in January and uploaded it on May 5th. And it was just 4 of us, and we just cranked that thing out really fast. And we did the next 50 levels and a hint book in the next 2 months, or 1.5 months after that. So yeah, we were really, really fast. Like, as an example of how fast we were, when we were making Doom, we forgot that we were supposed to do a Super Nintendo version of Wolfenstein. Like, we'd already promised a Japanese company that we were doing it, and in the middle of Doom, they call up and they're like, okay, we've waited long enough, where's our Wolfenstein? And we're like, oh my god, we totally forgot. Okay, we need to learn the Super Nintendo. And we're programming this PC, right? We're making Doom, and so everybody stop everything. Okay, we need to port the graphics over to some format. Let's find out what the format is, you know. And so we had to learn how to do the sound. We had to learn how to program, the system, all the registers, all that stuff at top speed because we were making Doom, and we were basically, I think, at peak form. We did it in 3 weeks. Yeah. So the Super Nintendo Wolfenstein was made in 3 weeks. Then we got right back to Doom.
Question for John. Am I right in believing that you were involved in Catacomb 3D, which predates Wolfenstein by a year, but doesn't really ever get mentioned?
Yes.
It's clearly an FPS.
I love your question. It's one of the best questions ever. So we came out with a game called Hover Tank 1. It's not called Hover Tank 3D. Don't fall into that lie. It's called Hover Tank 1. It came out in May, or we finished it in May of 1991. About 6 months before we made Catacomb 3D. And it took us 2 months to make Catacomb 3D, which was it was not Hover Tank 1, but used some of the Hover Tank 1 code. And we had to do it in 2 months. Like, we actually had a deadline for that. So it's the first texture-mapped shooter, right? Really the first first-person shooter, because you are shooting fireballs. It's not that cool, but you're shooting fireballs. It's not guns, but it's in 3D. It's texture-mapped. It's fast. Wolfenstein uses a lot of the Catacombs code, except it's in VGA. So Catacombs is in 16-color EGA mode, and so that game basically came out. We finished it at the end of November of '91, and it came out sometime later on the Gamer's Edge. So we made it for Gamer's Edge. I think we started on Wolfenstein before Catacomb 3D came out, but so Catacomb 3D predates Ultima Underworld, which came out just about maybe 6 weeks earlier than Wolfenstein. And they like to say that they made the first texture map game, but we already had finished that in November. So we are putting out Catacomb 3D in a box set really soon. So there have been several sequels to Catacomb. The original Catacomb game was a 2D gauntlet style game that Carmack had written just before we started working together on Slordax. So he made that game. Then we did Catacomb 3D. There was a sequel to Catacomb called Catacomb 2 that was done in early '91. And then we did Catacomb 3D, which is why it's called 3D, because it's the third one, and it's in 3D. And then following that, when we left the company had, this is Softdisk and Gamer's Edge, they made 3 more Catacomb games. So they made Catacomb, Abyss, Armageddon, and Apocalypse. So we now have the rights to put out a Catacomb 3D box set with all the games in it. So all 6 Catacombs are in this box. And the box looks really cool. There's little pins in it. It's kind of like Sigil. but it's for the the historic Catacomb 3D first texture map shooter game.
2 more questions, guys.
This is the first time that I've announced it, by the way, so nobody knows yet. Until you tweet it, nobody knows.
There's many Doom clubs on the Amiga. Have you played any? Have you got any favorites?
You mean like Gloom?
Oh yeah. Have you played Alien Breed 3D?
I haven't played any Amiga shooters yet, but I do have Gloom. I have that box, the original big box.
Last question, guys, please.
So, with the recent advancements of VR, have you considered making a new Doom VR game?
I have not thought about making a Doom VR game. I think they just did a mod for Doom to put it in VR, but I'm already working on my new shooter. So for about 3 months now, our team has been working on a brand new shooter. It's using Unreal 5. The team's gonna be pretty big, and it's going through a major publisher. It'll take years to get this game done, but it's a pretty unique idea for shooters, and I'm really excited to be making it.
Well, guys, we could talk for hours. 2 absolute legends. Put your hands together for Brenda and John.
You probably know this, but we have a booth in the expo hall, and that's where I'm going. So if you want to say hi or get photos or whatever, that's where I'm going.
I was going to go and update my Facebook status to say, so I was talking to John Romero there. Thanks very much, guys. Cheers.